What's up, guys, and welcome to another video. I finally found my microphone, so the audio quality is going to be 100 times better, and there will be no delay this time out. We are going to be going through everything that happened at UFC 300 and talk about some future matchups for each fighter. Now let's get right into it. To kick off the night, it was Deiveson Figueiredo going up against Cody Garbrandt. Now, we had Deiveson Figueiredo to win by KO. I thought that he was going to be able to find the chin of Garbrandt, and knowing that Cody Garbrandt has chin issues, I thought he was going to be able to put him away. But in that opening round, Cody Garbrandt took that 10-9 win. He was clearly the faster, more technical striker on the feet. His hands looked very clean and crisp, nice and quick as well. Figueiredo seemed to be a step behind, and he was getting tagged a decent amount. Cody hit him a few times and visibly stumbled Figueiredo. So good opening round for Cody Garbrandt. Deiveson Figueiredo wasn't able to solidify any takedowns, but he managed to switch up his game plan really well. In that second round, he came out and he basically immediately went in for a takedown, which he was able to get. Cody did scramble well early, but unfortunately, that initial force of him bursting to get back onto his feet, Figueiredo nullified that. He was able to garner some control on the ground, and he sunk in such a deep arm triangle. And kudos to Cody for hanging in there as long as he did. But he hung in there, didn't tap, and I think the relief of it, he kind of let his guard down. He tried to get back up on his feet, but Figueiredo's jiu-jitsu played a big factor in his win. He was able to get onto Cody's back when Cody was trying to get up off the mat there. Got the back and got himself a rear naked choke victory. So you kind of have to feel for Cody. He had a back-to-back wins going into this fight. He thought he was back on track after a little bit of a skid. So you got to feel for him a little bit. But great job by Figueiredo. This is the second win out of 2 fights at bantamweight, and he's been looking really good. And kudos to him for being able to change up that game plan. Now, as far as future matchups go, I got some notes over here. I don't think that Cody Garbrandt should fight a ranked opponent. I think the UFC should just give him another unranked guy, kind of get his confidence back before throwing him back in to the octagon with a ranked opponent. So you could give him somebody that's also going to stay on the feet with him. You have a UFC vet in Davey Grant. That would be a nice fight to watch. Davey Grant's got this unique striking style that Cody can compete with. Also, there's Daniel Marcos. If the UFC wants to build up Marcos a little bit more, a victory against Cody Garbrandt would actually be really good for Marcos's career. Also, there's Chris Gutierrez at number 16. Now, that'll be a very interesting fight because even though Cody is a technical and quick striker, Gutierrez is arguably more technical than Cody is on the feet. He may not have the power that Cody does, but that would be a really interesting fight. Probably the one that I would look forward to the most, but any of those 3 I think would be good opponents for Garbrandt. Now, in terms of Figueiredo, he's kind of in a weird spot because there's Petr Yan, which I think if the UFC wants to allow him to fight up in a possible title contender fight, I think against Petr Yan would be a perfect matchup. Jan's itching to get his chance at the title once again at 135. And Figueiredo, he looks really good at this weight class. So and at 36, I'm sure he's going to want to try and get that belt as quick, or at least get a shot at the belt as quickly as he can. And I think a fight against Petr Yan would be his best bet in terms of that. Now there is a possibility of Corey Sandhagen as well, but I think the UFC is going to try and rebook the Umar Nurmagomedov and Corey Sandhagen fight. So that to me is out of the question. But if they want to give Figueiredo a couple more fights before possibly going for that gold at bantamweight, there's the possibility of fighting Cheeto. I think the Cheeto fight is very interesting, especially because Cheeto's coming off of that title fight loss to Sean O'Malley. And there's Song Yadong as well. Song Yadong coming off that loss against Petr. I think those are 2 solid matchups. Both, I think, are ranked 8th, 7th, and 8th, something like that. It would be a big test for Figueiredo as well. So any of those, if they do want to give him a possible number 1 contender fight, Petr Yan for sure. But other than that, Cheeto and Song Yadong would be solid matchups for Figgy. Now, fight number 2, Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Now, this fight, I had Jim Miller to win. I thought Bobby Green's chin has depleted, which we will talk about. Jim Miller did land a few shots that visibly wobbled Bobby Green, but Bobby did a great job to stay in that fight. But unfortunately, Bobby Green ended up getting the win. Unfortunately for us, unfortunately for Jim, but honestly, Jim Miller did land those big shots that we expected him to. I thought he was going to try and wrestle a little bit more. I don't know if they were like half-ass takedown attempts, but I didn't really see very many from the Jim Miller side. One thing you cannot deny is that he is an absolute dog, though. He kept coming forward. Bobby Green was piecing him apart basically the entire fight. Jim Miller's face was an absolute mess by the end of it, all bloodied up, bunch of cuts, everything like that. He's an absolute dog, especially at 40 years old. He never quit. He kept plodding forward, trying to win the fight. So big kudos to Jim Miller. But Bobby Green looked good, man. Good, crisp boxing, as you come to expect from Bobby Green at this point in his career. He had a nice, quick jab. And Jim's age finally showed in that matchup. Bobby Green was always a step ahead. Lots of volume. And was the clear winner. He even garnered 2 10-8 rounds in that fight, which were well deserved. The guy was piecing up Jim Miller. So a lot of people had Bobby Green written off after that absolute demolishing, absolutely terrible loss to Jalin Turner, who we will get to. I have a bone to pick with that guy, regardless. Good fight for Bobby Green. Well-deserved win. Now, as far as future matchups, I don't know if Jim Miller plans on retiring. I mean, there's nothing left for him at this point. I don't think he's going to make a title run. He probably is just in it for the love of the game. But if he decides to stay, I think a solid send-off fight for both fighters, actually, his opponent as well, I think he should go up against Tony Ferguson. Both legendary veterans of the sport. They should arguably already be retired. And I think they can go out, fight somebody more up to their speed, and just have an absolute brawl for the fans, for the old UFC fans. I think it'd be fantastic to see both of these guys share an octagon together. So let's book it. UFC, give them both a nice send-off. Jim Miller versus Tony Ferguson. That would be awesome to see. And as far as Bobby Green goes, at 37, I don't think he's making a title run. We know that he's in it for the money. That's all he talks about during his press conferences. He wants to make that bread. That's why he fights as often as he does as well. So let's just put on some good fights, good entertaining fights for the fans. He doesn't have to go fight anybody in the top 10, top 5, top 15, whatever. I think a few possible matchups for him. Honestly, I heard that he called out Paddy Pimblett in his post-fight interview with Joe. Definitely a solid matchup. I think that would be awesome because the UFC wants to build up Paddy. They love the guy. And this could be a good fight where he kind of wrestles and can get a solid win if he avoids the exchanges on the feet. And yeah, like I said, with Bobby calling him out as well, I think that's a fantastic fight to make. So book that as well. Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett in the next lightweight matchup against each other. Now, fight number 3, we move to Jessica Andrade and Marina Rodriguez. Now, Jessica Andrade wins a split decision, wins the fight by split decision. I honestly think it just should have been unanimous. This fight did go how I expected it to, but I was on the other end of the breakdown. Now, I thought that Marina was going to be able to stay on the outside, use her range, use her technical striking to beat Andrade, which she did at times during that fight. She had quick hands. She was able to stay at a distance that Andrade had trouble closing for the most part, but we saw a similarity between that Lemos and Rodriguez fight. I did mention that if Rodriguez finds trouble, it is going to be similar to the Lemos fight where she can't take the power of Jessica Andrade. And when Andrade landed, you can see it noticeably affect Rodriguez. She was on wobbly legs a few times. I believe it was in the second round, but regardless, Andrade, definitely not the technical fighter here, but she walked through everything Marina gave her and just basically pitbulled her way to a win. In that first round, which was kind of, if you think about it, the deciding factor, Marina threw she threw a kick and slipped, and Andrade pounced on her and ate up that entire round on the ground for the remainder of the round, and it ended up solidifying round number 1, which could have been the difference for Marina, because that third round, I think, was for Marina Rodriguez. I'm not 100% sure, but regardless, Andrade just plotted forward, closed that gap, landed heavily on Rodriguez, and ended up getting a rightful victory. I don't think it should have been a split decision. Jessica clearly won that fight in my books. And we start off the night 1-2. Super stressed about that, but regardless, it's okay. We ended up doing pretty well as the fight card went on. Now, in terms of them and their next opponents, I kind of have their division like all mapped out. So let's take a look. Tatiana Suarez should fight Weili Zhang for the strawweight title. I don't think there's any denying Suarez at this point. She's 10-0, and I don't think any of her fights have even been close. She just absolutely dominates her opponents. So after Weili defeated Jan this weekend, give Tatiana the next title shot. I think that's a perfect opportunity for the next strawweight championship bout. And then Xiaonan should go up against Lemos. I would say Andrade versus Xiaonan, but they've already fought each other, and Xiaonan knocked out Andrade, so I don't think there's any necessity for a rematch there. So I think Yan should fight Lemos. Andrade should fight Jandiroba or Jandiroba. I don't know how her name is actually pronounced. I hear it both ways on when I hear breakdown videos. But I think Andrade versus Jandiroba is a good fight, because Jandiroba has been surprising a lot of people. She's been taking out a bunch of prospects as well. So I think that's another little stepping stone for her, and I think that'd be a good matchup to make. And last but not least, I think Marina Rodriguez should go up against Amanda Ribas, because I'm not going to write her off yet. She is 36, so I mean, she's on the older end of fighting, especially at the strawweight in the strawweight division. But I think that Ribas fight would be lots of fun. Both of them are strikers. Ribas may mix in some takedowns here and there, but I think that's a good matchup to make. So Suarez Zhang for the next title fight. Xiaonan versus Lemos. Andrade versus Jandiroba, and then Marina Rodriguez versus Amanda Ribas. Did I say Amanda Rodriguez? I don't know. Regardless, Rodriguez versus Ribas. I think those 4 fights are solid for the strawweight division. So let's make those happen. Now, next up, I have some beef with this fight here. That 300K bonus thing that they mentioned at the press conference is 100% the reason why Jalin Turner doesn't have a win over Moicano this weekend. Jalin Turner was a very popular pick by finish as well. I saw a lot of people say he's going to finish KO Moicano. And at the end of that first round, we all thought it was going to happen. For some reason, like Moicano did have some success in the clinch, I think, in like trying to take down Turner in that first round. But Turner was able to get back up, and he blasted Moicano, put him on his ass, and tried to be a little flashy and do a walk-off KO. He had that 300K in mind, and that single second lapse of judgment cost him that fight. Instead of pouncing on that on top of Moicano and trying to end that fight, he had 15 seconds after he put him onto the canvas to finish it. That ruined the fight for him. I don't know if he was trying to get that bonus. I don't know if he was worried about jumping in the guard of Moicano. I don't know what it was, but he didn't finish the fight at the end of the first, came back in the second, and Moicano, being the absolute dog that he is, got the fight down to the canvas, mounted Jalin Turner, and just started feeding him shots, and Jalin Turner just quit on himself. It was unbelievable to watch. After putting somebody on their ass on the canvas, he allowed somebody that doesn't even have that good of takedowns to take him down and get his first TKO victory in his martial arts career, not in the UFC. Moicano's never KO or TKO'd anybody in his career, but now he has. Jalin Turner loses by TKO in the second round of that fight. So good job for Money Moicano. A lot of people were writing him off for this fight, and Jalin Turner, we know now, can quit. He'll quit on himself on Saturday, and he'll quit on himself in the future as well if he has to face adversity. So great job by Moicano. Now, if we're talking about future matchups, I think Turner should fight somebody outside of the top 15. You could give him like Grant Dawson or like Joel Alvarez, somebody like that. I think those would be a good matchups for both parties in that fight, because let's say he goes up against Dawson. Dawson can easily win that fight. I think he's a much better wrestler, and I wouldn't say grappler necessarily, but he's a more physically imposing fighter, and he should be able to wrestle Turner, wear him down, and get that win. So it'd be a nice bounce back victory for Dawson. And against Joel Alvarez, same idea, gives him an opportunity to kind of climb up the rankings a little bit, and it also gives Turner a chance to get back into that W column as well. So I think either of those two guys would be good. As for Moicano, he has proved to be an absolute dog, and they should just keep pushing him up the rankings after stunning Jalin Turner on Saturday. Someone like Dan Hooker or Dariush would actually be cool to see. Let's say I think Dan Hooker would be a really solid fight, but I wouldn't mind the Dariush one either. Either of those two would be solid. Now let's get into the next fight. It is Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. Now this fight, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I can't speak too much about it, not only because it was only like a minute and a half long, but the very legal stream that I was watching, it ended up cutting out during this fight, and by the time it came back, Diego was on the fence cheering and got a finish victory over Sodiq Yusuff. From what I was able to see from the replays and hear from other analysts that broke down the fight after UFC 300, there was some leg kicks being exchanged, but basically Diego Lopes was doing the best work in the clinch. He was able to do a single collar tie and land heavy uppercut shots on Sodiq Yusuff that clearly stunned him. I think there was two separate exchanges there. Yusuff, the first time they had that clinch, Yusuff got put down and ended up surviving, so good for him. He didn't quit, but he only survived to get caught up in the clinch again and get put out by Diego Lopes. This guy is an absolute menace. We all thought this guy was going to come in, be a BJJ fighter, and the fact that he's improved his striking so much and holds this much power is so scary, considering if the fight gets to the mat, he's just as dangerous. So I am so excited to see what Diego Lopes' future looks like in the UFC. I think he's a contender already. I think he has a future title shot in his sights. I think it is well deserved as also. The guy's an absolute beast. So let's talk about what's next for both of these fighters. Now, Yusuff, there's a lot of potential matchups you can make here. I think you give him an up-and-comer a shot to get back into the W column, but you can give an up-and-comer an opportunity to kind of crack the top 20 and maybe get into the top 15 rankings in their next fight. So Muhammad Naimov, honestly, that's not too bad of a fight. They're not too, they're kind of close in the rankings. I think, Yusuff is, 19 or 18, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken. Regardless, I think Muhammad Naimov is a good fight. Even Yusuff Zalal. Zalal didn't shock us completely, but I think he had a great performance against Billy Quarantillo, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Billy Quarantillo a few weeks ago. So I actually wouldn't mind seeing Sodiq Yusuff versus Yusuff Zalal. I think that would be a nice matchup as well. But the most fun fight that I could see with them being close in rankings is Sodiq Yusuff versus Nate Landwehr. Nate Landwehr is an absolute beast. I would bet on him in that fight. Hopefully, if that matchup does happen, Nate Landwehr is an underdog, because regardless, this guy takes the punishment, but he doesn't go away. He'll just come forward, and basically finish his opponent. So if I'm going to pick, I'll go Nate Landwehr versus Sodiq Yusuff. I think that would be an awesome fight to watch. And for Diego Lopes, guy's an absolute stud, honestly. This guy should get pushed into and get tested in the top 10 area, I think. But at this point, I don't know if Movsar Evloev rematch is in Lopes' future just yet, because I believe Evloev does have a case for the next title shot at featherweight. I think it's going to be something a little different though, but I don't think that Evloev rematch happens right now. But depending on how big of a jump they want to give him, a Dan Ige fight would be really cool to see. Diego Lopes versus Dan Ige. You could also do any of these three as well. You have Chikadze, Calvin Kattar, and Arnold Allen. Those are all like around that top 10 area. So any of those four guys that we mentioned would be solid. Dan Ige is an underrated fighter in my opinion. The guy's a beast. I think he's ranked like 12th or 13th. I'm not 100% sure, but if they don't want to do a huge jump, maybe give him like a Dan Ige. But if they do want to push him into that top 10, the Arnold Allen fight is really intriguing. Calvin Kattar fight would be really fun to watch. And then you have, who else did I mention? And Giga Chikadze. I'm a huge fan of Chikadze, so maybe I don't want to see that fight because I think Diego Lopes will be able to beat him. But I think that's the next step for Lopes. Give him an opponent near the top 10. Now let's get into the next fight. It is Holm versus Kayla Harrison. Now this fight went just as basically all of us expected. Holm, 42 years old. Kayla Harrison, an absolute beast. I don't know how or if she's natural. She's a massive woman. Strong as hell. Super muscular. I don't know how. Anyway, we all thought she was going to come in. If she made the weight, we were worried about to see how she was going to be at 135 because she hasn't weighed that little in probably a very, very long time. But she looked great. She made the weight. She was all smiles during the press conference, smiles afterwards. She came in there and just dominated Holm. Now, it is a 42-year-old Holm, but she is a decorated UFC vet. I think it was a fantastic debut fight for her, debut matchup, I should say. But in terms of how the fight went, it was fantastic for her. She didn't look great on the feet, but nobody expected her to stand with Holm and outstrike her. We all knew she was going to work in those takedowns, dominate on the ground, and do some damage down there, which she ended up doing. I thought it was going to be like a unanimous decision win for her, just basically similar to what happened in the Aljo Calvin Kattar fight, which we will get to after this, I believe. Maybe a couple more. No, it is the next one. Regardless, great job by Kayla Harrison. Dominated on the mat, wrestled Holm, did fantastic damage, and was able to get her out of there in the second round. And that is what we all expected. She was like a minus 450 favorite, so I'm not going to toot my horn that much because I picked Kayla Harrison. I think the whole world did. Regardless, what's next for these two ladies? I honestly think Holm should probably retire. I know fighters don't typically like retiring off of losses. It doesn't leave a good taste in their mouth for their career, which I understand. But if they want to do like a send-off fight, I think they should give her somebody that she can beat, and around the same age as her. So you have fighters like Julia Avila. She's like 35, 36 years old maybe by the time they fight, and I think that's a winnable fight for Holm. You could also do something like an Ashley Evans Smith. I know she's way out of the rankings, but I think that's a winnable fight for Holly. And at this point, I think that's where she should aim. That's what she should aim towards. Going into a fight, getting that dub, and hanging it up, calling it a career. She's been fantastic for the UFC, but I think it is time for her to retire. If she doesn't want to, I think that those are two solid fights for her to win. But if the UFC wants to give something that the fans will enjoy, old heads in the UFC would actually probably like a Holm Miesha Tate rematch. Miesha Tate is still ranked, I believe, at strawweight. She recently came back and fought Julia Avila, and I think that'd be really cool to see. I think Miesha Tate wins that fight, but it would still be really cool for them to share the octagon once again, and it'd be a cool fight to see as a UFC fan. Now, next is Kayla Harrison. Honestly, she should probably fight one more time, considering this was her UFC debut. But honestly, just give her Raquel Pennington. Give her the title shot. I think Kayla Harrison beats anybody in the top 5 regardless. I honestly think she beats Raquel Pennington also. So why wait? She's 33 years old. Just put away Holm in the second round. Give her the title shot. She's also... she's going to be a fighter that goes for the finishes, and that's why I think it's going to bring a little bit of excitement to these women's weight classes. So give her the title shot, put her up against Pennington whenever both ladies are ready. I think that's the play. All right, moving on down, or I guess up the card, we have Calvin Kattar going up against Aljamain Sterling. And here's another fight that went how I expected. The way we broke it down was Aljo was going to stay active with a lot of leg activity, leg kicks, kicks up the middle. He didn't really, and he actually did throw a decent amount of kicks, but the fight didn't really last on the feet very, very long. For him to even need to do that, he clinched up. He got the fight to the ground basically whenever he wanted. And it's not the most exciting style. We all know this, but we don't expect Aljamain to come out and throw hands for 15 minutes straight or try to knock somebody out on the feet. That's not his style. He's going to come in, wrestle, try to grapple, garner a lot of control time, try to get those submissions, and that's exactly what he did against Kattar here. Kattar is a striker, so regardless of his layoff, regardless of his previous injury, why would you take that risk? He's making his debut at featherweight, talking about Aljo, and his path of least resistance is just to take this striker down, dominate him on the mat, and cruise your way to a victory in the new weight class that you're in. So good for Aljo. He solidified that featherweight debut victory. Good for him. Like we said, anybody that expected Aljo to come in and bang with Calvin Kattar, it's just silly. We knew what he was going to do, and he was able to implement his game plan. So good for him. I would like to see Calvin Kattar maybe fight a striker next, but we'll get into that right now. So possible matchups going forward. We have Calvin Kattar. I don't think he should fight up after 3 consecutive losses. I think maybe the UFC gives an up-and-coming featherweight an opportunity against Calvin Kattar. But a lot of these fighters have fights booked. So I was thinking like a Cub Swanson. I know I just said up and comer and Cub Swanson is a vet, but I think that would be a nice fight considering Kattar's where he's at in his career right now. I think a fight with Cub Swanson would have been really solid. But Cub Swanson is booked to fight Andre Fili in a couple of months. I think 3 months now at UFC 303. And then I was looking at maybe Alex Caceres, but he's also booked to fight Sean Woodson in a fight night soon. So I don't know. Like, if you don't move that far down the rankings, maybe you give him Bryce Mitchell when Bryce Mitchell decides to make his return. Regardless, those two I really thought were good, but they have fights booked, the Swanson and the Caceres fight. But I guess right now you give him Bryce Mitchell possibly. No idea what they're going to do with Calvin. But Aljamain Sterling, former champ with a win in this new weight class. I'm thinking Brian Ortega against Aljamain Sterling. They're not going to give Ortega another title shot for another fight or two. So why not just put these two together? They both have it'll be a clash of styles. They're both grapplers, and I think it'll just be really interesting to see how they do against each other. And that would be a good indication of who may fight for the title next. So I think Brian Ortega would be solid against Aljamain Sterling. Book that fight. Now we go to the featured fight of the night. Closing out the prelims, it is Jiri Prochazka versus Aleksandar Rakic. Now, we had Rakic to win, and he looked fantastic. There is no reason why he should hang his head after losing to Prochazka. Reason is, he was the far better and more technical striker. This guy was chewing up both of Jiri Prochazka's legs, landing flush punches on the chin of Prochazka, but Jiri just would not stop coming forward. This guy ate everything Rakic gave him and just had no regard for his own life. He did not care about the damage, did not care about anything that was getting put his way. He just continued to march forward, and eventually he was able to find Rakic's chin in that second round. And once he landed flush, Rakic started getting stumbled, started getting wobbled, and once Jiri smelled the blood, it was over. Rakic did a good job trying to avoid getting finished, but eventually Prochazka got the fight to the ground after a few more strikes and put Rakic away. The better fighter in this matchup did not win. Prochazka's unique and awkward style only goes so far. The more technical and better striker in this matchup was Rakic. And I honestly think if they rematch, Rakic will win this fight. But and out of all 3 fighters that came off of long layoffs and leg injuries, so out of Kattar, Rakic and Jamal Hill. Rakic looked by far the best one. There was hardly any ring rust, in my opinion. He came out, looked amazing. Like, I know I'm praising the guy that ended up losing, but I don't think Rakic has anything to be upset about in this fight. Yes, he got caught. Yes, but Jiri's one of the better fighters in the light heavyweight division. Technique aside, the guy's an absolute dog, and he showed it in this fight. But regardless, Rakic, I think he can get back in there in maybe like 4 or 5 months, let him recover a little bit. But I think he'll look even better his next time in. And Jiri just out-dogged him. That's all there is to it. He wasn't the better fighter in this matchup. He just took everything that came his way, gave it right back, and put Rakic away. Good for Jiri. Great performance by both men, honestly. Well, great performance because Jiri got the finish. Other than that, there was nothing great about Jiri's performance. Regardless, let's talk about what's next for them. So I don't think Prochazka should get another title shot right away. I think you give him another fight and then possibly talk about him fighting for the belt once again. But give him Jamal Hill. I think I actually have similar to how I was talking about the strawweight division. I think I have a few light heavyweight fights mapped out for the top ranked contenders. So let's talk about that. So Jiri, Prochazka, here's how I see it playing out. Alex Pereira defends his belt against Ankalaev. Now, Pereira did come out and say he doesn't think Prochazka deserves another title shot right away, but he will do what the UFC wants. So if Jiri's next, Jiri's next. But he did mention Ankalaev. He also did mention he wants to go up to heavyweight. I don't know what's going to go on with that. But in terms of the light heavyweight division, I think Pereira defends his belt against Ankalaev next. Prochazka can go up against Jamal Hill. And Rakic can either run it back with Blachowicz because he did look good in that fight before the injury. So I think they can run it back, but they could actually put him up against Roundtree or Nikita Krylov. I think a Rakic Roundtree fight would be really cool to watch. I'm a fan of both of those fighters, so I don't know how I'll feel about it per se. I don't know who I would necessarily go with, but I think either of those matchups would good. If I was to choose, it would be between Blachowicz and Blachowicz. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I think it's Blachowicz. That or Roundtree. I think those two would be solid. I honestly do think they run it back with Rakic and Jan, though, so let's see that. And yeah, Jiri, I think, should fight Jamal Hill. I think that's the next fight for both of those men. Now, getting into the main card, if you guys are enjoying the breakdown, enjoying the videos, and you want to see more in the future, make sure to hit that like button and click subscribe on the channel. I appreciate the support. Let's get into the main card. Now, we have Bo Nickal opening up the show against Cody Brundage. And here's another fight that went similarly to what we thought, just not as fast. It's really easy to think that Bo Nickal's just going to run through all of his opponents because that's what he's been doing. And Cody Brundage is really not that talented of a fighter. We talked about that during the breakdown. But this was a really good fight for Bo in terms of gaining experience. This was his 6th professional fight or something like that. And 4 of his 5 fights before this weekend were under the UFC umbrella. Now, he does have that collegiate wrestling background, very decorated collegiate wrestler, but in terms of MMA experience, he's very green in his career, and going up against Brundage and facing a little bit of adversity is going to do wonders for him. Now, Brundage put up a good fight. He was really putting the pressure, I guess, a little early, so Bo was hesitant to go for those takedowns because he didn't want to get tagged with like an uppercut or a knee or something up the middle. But regardless, he was able to eventually work his way down to the mat in the first round. He ended the first round on Cody's back, but he really wasn't doing anything. He was kind of just hanging on. Maybe he was trying to get back to his corner and just kind of recuperate and readjust maybe and have a different outlook for the second round. I don't know what it was necessarily, but when Cody landed early, you can tell Bo really didn't like it. So that's going to be something he's going to have to work on, or something that we fade in the future if he goes up against a solid striker with good takedown defense. But regardless, he was able to come out in the second, get another takedown, work his way, and get a rear naked choke, I believe, against Cody Brundage. So he ended up dominating the fight. Let's not make it sound like Brundage put up a close fight and was close to defeating Bo Nickal, because that's not the case. Bo dominated this fight. He did have to fight through some adversity, though, and like I mentioned, this is going to do better for him going forward. But seeing him not completely blow through his opponent this time, I think they can kind of slow down on the whole Bo Nickal hype train. I don't think they want to go and derail it, considering that Cody Brundage, out of all people, kind of met Bo with some resistance. So maybe not like fast track him as quickly as they want. In terms of future matchups, let's talk about Bo. Maybe you can go with somebody like Josh Fremd or like Eric Anders or Anders, however you pronounce his last name. I think those two fights would be solid for him. I think those are very winnable fights as well. And like I said, I don't think they should fast track them. Either of those two would be kind of solid for Bo to get a little bit more experience under his belt before maybe trying to crack that top 15. Now, as far as Cody Brundage, as far as I'm concerned with Cody, despite being 4-5 in the UFC, I think they're going to give him another fight, because he did the UFC a favor by taking on Bo Nickal here at UFC 300. So I think he gets another fight. But as far as like who he's going up against next, I genuinely don't know. And honestly, I don't want to sound like an awful person, but who really cares, man? Honestly, whoever he goes up against next, I think he's just going to end up losing the fight anyway and getting cut from the promotion. So if I did have to pick, maybe like give him like Cesar Almeida or something like that. I think that would be a solid little step up for Almeida, because it's another wrestler that he can kind of show off his takedown defense against, and he's going to be miles ahead on the feet. Brundage has been put away multiple times, so maybe give him like Cesar Almeida to build up Almeida a little bit. Yeah, I think that would be a nice fight next, but honestly, it doesn't really matter to me what happens with Cody next. All right, and then we move up to Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan. This fight did not go how I thought. I thought there was going to be a finish in this fight, and although there was a couple of moments where we thought it could have, and one very early that we're going to talk about, Charles kind of seemed a little hesitant on the feet. I don't know if he was worried about exposing himself to getting taken down, and he didn't want to get dominated like he did against in that Islam Makhachev fight. But it was kind of odd to see Charles like not just throw himself into the fire. Arman did a good job on the feet as well. I was kind of surprised. It was kind of a lot of back and forth between the two of them. But Arman, I think what happened was he threw a kick. Charles like kind of caught it and put Arman on his butt on the canvas, and then I think Arman ended up trying to shoot when he got up, something like that. Regardless of how it happened, Charles sunk in one of the deepest guillotines I've seen, and kudos to Arman for not tapping. This guy was like, I don't know how he didn't tap. Charles had it so tight. He had it tied up for quite a bit of time as well, and almost finished the fight in the first round. Good for Arman for not tapping and not quitting on himself. Absolute dog, and he showed it in that moment. But I think Charles did take the first round, not solely because of the guillotine, but I think that was a very crucial moment that could have ended the fight. And considering nothing else really significant happened in that first round, the striking exchanges were quite even, and there was no like visible damage on either fighter. I think you give Charles round one. I think the judges also gave Charles round one. Now, the second round, clearly Arman, he dominated on the mat. He wrestled Charles, he controlled him, and he was doing good damage in top control. I think he landed an elbow that sliced open Charles and made him bleed. Charles is known to bleed in this fight, so it was expected here. But Arman did a great job in that second round. Now, the third round is where it could have gone either way. This was a split decision victory for Arman, but I honestly could have seen them give it to Charles, and the reason for that is because of that Isaac Dulgarian and Christian Rodriguez fight. Now, it seems like UFC judges are kind of like, they're looking more for damage. They want damage, whether it's on the ground through ground and pound, whether it's on the feet. They look for damage and not so much control time. Now, so you go back to that Dulgarian fight, and that's exactly what you think about. Dulgarian lost a second round where he controlled Christian Rodriguez for 4 minutes and 11 seconds and got outstruck by 3 strikes. He landed 5 and Rodriguez landed 8, but somehow none of that control time mattered. So if you're going to, the inconsistencies in the judging is why I think Charles wins this fight, because but clearly today was a little bit different. Charles, despite that second round, yes, Arman, I give him the second round, did more damage, controlled Charles on the ground. Nothing significant happened for Charles in that. Tsarukyan also landed an axe kick in that fight, which was insane to see. But I'm going off topic. First round, I'll give that edge to Charles. I think the judges did as well. Second round, clearly a Tsarukyan round. But that third round, Arman didn't do much with that control time on the ground. There's nothing much that he did. He didn't mount any offense. He just kind of controlled and had positional advantage over Charles. But nearing the end of that fight, Charles sunk in a Darce choke that if there was any more time on the clock, he could have ended up winning by submission. Now, like I said, that's why I think it could have gone either way. I do agree with the decision, though. Tsarukyan should have won that fight. And as far as future matchups go for both of these fighters, I think there's no denying Tsarukyan. I think he fights Islam or Dustin Poirier, depending on who wins. Now, apparently, the UFC was talking to Tsarukyan's management after that fight in the back, and they offered the title shot but in 2 months. So at UFC 302, I believe. And Tsarukyan said no. I don't know if he wants more preparation for Makhachev. I think that was a mistake. I know you shouldn't rush, but think about it like this. If Poirier ends up winning against Makhachev, they're going to give Islam they're going to give him an immediate rematch. There's probably no denying that. So now if you just risk having to wait up to a year to fight for the belt when you could have done it in 2 months. So I don't know how Arman felt after that fight. I don't know, but I think he should have taken that regardless. There's no denying him. I think his next fight will be for the lightweight title. Now, as far as Charles goes, this is going to be kind of tricky because he's fought everybody in like the top 6 and the champion. So who do you give him? There's only a couple names in around his rank that he hasn't seen, Garbrandt and Fiziev. I don't know when Fiziev plans on coming back because of that leg injury that he suffered against Garbrandt, but I think Garbrandt will be ready prior. And as much as I really don't like Garbrandt as a fighter, I think him going up against Oliveira kind of cements an argument for him to push for the title. So I think if I had to make the decision, it would probably be Charles Oliveira against Mateusz Garbrandt next. Now we move to the best fight I have seen probably in my entire life. Justin Gaethje going up against Max Holloway for the BMF title. This is probably the best fight I've ever watched live. It was absolutely incredible. Max Holloway is the definition of a BMF. This guy goes up a weight class, goes up against one of the hardest hitting fighters in the UFC, and absolutely just demolishes him. He is just piecing him apart. There was a moment where Justin Gaethje knocked down Max Holloway. They actually didn't credit Gaethje for a knockdown, but Max Holloway hit the canvas with his ass after a shot from Gaethje. He did pop right back up, and maybe that's why they didn't count it as a knockdown, but he definitely got knocked down in that fight. Max Holloway did actually poke Gaethje in the eye a couple times early on in that fight, which obviously you never really want to see. But besides those moments, it was Max Holloway the entire time. Now, the part that makes this one of the best moments, the coldest moment in UFC history, is this guy is up 3-1, arguably up 4-0, and is winning that 5th round. And in the dying seconds, this guy looks at Gaethje, points down at the middle of the octagon, and he said, "Let's bang this out." And they go in there, they start cracking, and with 1 second left, Max hits him with a clean right hand and face plants Gaethje, knocks him out cold with 1 second left for the BMF title. That was the most BMF shit I've ever witnessed in my entire life. Max he's the man. I'm so happy we ended up going with that pick. I was on Gaethje for a very long time, but the days leading up to the fight, I switched to Max Holloway. It's in the breakdown video. Why? And it basically played out that way as well. Max has never looked better. I think this is one of his best performances to date. And talking about future matchups, there is no denying him to go up against Topuria. Now, I do think Volkanovski deserves his rematch. I just don't think it has to be Topuria's next fight. I think Volk should wait a little bit. He's coming off of 2 back-to-back KO losses, especially at his age in the smaller weight classes. I think he should wait a little bit before he gets back in there, leaving an opportunity for Max to take on Topuria for the featherweight belt. There is nobody else. After Saturday night, there is nobody else that should fight Topuria for that belt. Give it to Max Holloway. Do it in Spain if you must. Doesn't matter. I am so excited for that fight. Now, in terms of Justin Gaethje, though, I don't know what you do with Gaethje, because he was talking about making one last run for the lightweight title, and unfortunately him taking this fight was a mistake. He was off of back-to-back wins. He beat an up-and-comer in Fiziev. He put away Dustin Poirier over the summer, and he was looking like he was next up for the belt, but he did the UFC a favor, made an absolute banger of a fight against Max Holloway, and he is also a BMF in his own right. Yes, he held the belt, but regardless, what he did to give us an absolute show at UFC 300, I have big props for Gaethje. I'm a huge fan of his. I just don't know what you do next. He's not getting the title shot after that loss against Max. Plus, Dustin already got booked for it. You're not fighting Dustin again. You're not fighting Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan is going to be next up after Poirier. So who do you give him? You give him like Beneil Dariush or something? I could see it. I honestly could see maybe like Garbrandt or Dariush, something like that, so he doesn't fight too far out of his range of ranking there. You don't give him Charles. I don't think you give him Dubronx. They've already fought. Dubronx put him away. So yeah, maybe Dariush. I'm not sure what he plans on doing. He's probably going to take a break, but regardless, give Max his featherweight title shot. What an absolute banger. I don't think we'll see a fight of that magnitude in a very, very long time. What a treat we got. If UFC 300 ended there, I would have been satisfied with the whole event. But we got 2 more fights after that, and both of them being championship fights as well. So let's get into those to finish things off. We had Zhang Weili going up against Xiaonan for the strawweight belt. And this was an interesting fight because Xiaonan knocked down Weili like a few times during that fight. Her boxing looked so sharp, so clean, and we knew that she was going to be the better striker in this matchup. But I didn't think she was going to put Weili on the canvas so many times during that fight. Now, thankfully, Weili is the more dominant wrestler. We did have plays on Zhang this weekend, so thankfully she was able to dominate on the mat, put in some good work. The one moment that I don't understand how it didn't end was she was unconscious at the end of that first round after a rear naked choke by Weili. I don't understand. She literally was unconscious getting up to her feet. And interesting enough, now that I remember as I'm talking about this, you can hear the commentary team talking about the corner of Xiaonan giving her something like smelling salts to wake her up. Like, are you even allowed to do that? I don't know what went on. I don't know how Jason Herzog didn't stop that fight. That was absolutely wild, but that moment was kind of crazy. Regardless, good for her for coming back and putting up another 20 minutes after being unconscious in the first 5 minutes of that fight. But ultimately, the difference was Weili getting those takedowns, dominating control. And the thing I like about Weili is she doesn't just control on the ground. She works her way to dominant positions. She works her way and threatens grappling. But most of all, she does damage. She gets them in bad spots and pummels while she's on top. Great performance by her, minus the knockdowns. I don't think her chin is given out, honestly. She's 34 now. She's been knocked out before. We saw that Namajunas knockout. We just saw her get knocked down like 2 or 3 times in that fight just now against Xiaonan. So I don't know how much longer that chin is going to last. But great performance for her. Great title defense. And Yeah, it was just good for her. I think, like we mentioned earlier, we were talking about the strawweights already after the Andrade and Rodriguez fight. I think Yan Xiaonan should go up against Amanda Lemos, another striker that she can stand with and kind of like get back into that win column. And then Weili Zhang should defend her title against Tatiana Suarez. I don't think there's any denying Suarez. We already talked about this. So Weili versus Tatiana for the strawweight strap, and Yan Xiaonan versus Amanda Lemos for a striker versus striker matchup. Now to close things off, this was a very fast fight. We had Alex Pereira to win, and what a left hook. Talk about BMF. Talk about Max Holloway pulling off some BMF shit by pointing down to the canvas and scrapping with one of the most dangerous people in the UFC. Alex Pereira also did something BMF like. So he goes in there, didn't really last long. I think it was like a minute in a bit. There wasn't too much to talk about. There was a moment where Jamal threw a kick, hit the cup of Alex Pereira, and Herb Dean comes in, calls a timeout, and Pereira just puts his hand out to stop Herb Dean from stopping the fight. And then Herb's like, okay, continue. And then Alex Pereira never even left eye contact with Jamal either. He just goes like this, waves off Herb, goes back in his stance, and he just boom, like it was like a diagonal uppercut left hand that just drops Jamal Hill. Alex Pereira does what Jalen Turner doesn't know how to do, apparently. Gets on top of Alex Pereira, Alex Pereira gets on top of Jamal Hill, finishes him with 2, 3, 4 more strikes, puts Jamal Hill away with ease to defend his light heavyweight title. Absolute beauty performance by one of the baddest men on the planet in Alex Pereira. So we already talked about what I think should be next for the light heavyweight division. Alex Pereira should go up against Ankalaev and defend his title. I think that'll be a huge test. That'll be a huge test for him because Ankalaev does like to strike, but he will mix in that wrestling if he has to. So it's going to be interesting to see how Pereira does with that Dagestani wrestling and how he does defending it. And Jamal Hill, I think, should go up against Prochazka. Prochazka shouldn't get another title shot after a victory against Rakic, who was coming off of a 2-year layoff and an injury. So make it happen. Yuri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill. Alex Pereira to defend his title against Ankalaev. Now, Pereira wants to make a 3-week turnaround and fight in Brazil at UFC 301. I don't know if that's going to be possible because, mind you, he didn't take any damage, and he doesn't cut as much as he did before going down to middleweight to go to light heavyweight. So I don't think he put too much strain on his body. He didn't take any damage in the Jamal Hill fight, and the guy's training all the time, so he's going to be ready in 3 weeks regardless. It's just, is his opponent going to be ready? Who are they going to book for that fight? I don't think Ankalaev's going to be ready in 3 weeks. Despite all these people, what they talk about online, I don't think he'll accept that fight. If we see Alex Pereira at UFC Brazil in UFC 301, that would be insane. I'm here for it. I love watching Alex Pereira fight. But yeah, honestly, UFC, make that happen. Let's do this. All right, so that's my breakdowns. That was my recap of the UFC 300 event. We talked about future matchups as well. I want to thank you guys for joining me for another video. We finally got the mic going, so the audio quality is going to be dope from now on. And make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button and the subscribe button for future content as well. We'll be dropping UFC videos from now on. So thank you guys once again, and I'll see you in the next one.